Good evening, everybody. We're back for another week of our study in Job. Tonight we're going to be in Job chapter 15, and we're going to finish. Chapter 15 tonight. And so if you were with us last week, if you watched last week when we got started, or when we started chapter 15. What we did was we talked about Eliphaz's response to Job. Job had talked for about 3 chapters, and so Eliphaz then responds to Job's very long sort of speech. And so and there were really 2 things that Eliphaz told Job in the first part of chapter 15. One was that Job is not as wise as he thinks he is, and Job is not as perfect as he claims to be. Again, what we've seen throughout the book of Job so far is Job is maintaining his innocence. He's saying, I didn't do anything to deserve the everything that's happened to me, and so and I don't know why this is happening. And his friends have said, you obviously have done something, because this kind of thing doesn't happen to good people, and so you obviously have sin in your life. As they've gone back and forth for several chapters, and so last week Eliphaz responded to Job. And basically the way that we ended it was Eliphaz said that if God can't trust the angels in heaven not to sin, essentially, then how much less can he trust man, who, in his words, is abominable and filthy and drinks iniquity like water. So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to finish up chapter 15. There's a lot here, and for sake of time, I'm probably gonna go through it kind of quickly. But as always, if you want to comment, if you want to ask a question or anything like that, feel free to do so. I read those comments. If questions are asked, I try to respond to those. I enjoy that engagement. And so if there's something that you see that I don't see, or there's something that you're kind of curious about, feel free to comment, ask a question, make a remark, that type of thing, and we can hash this out. Not hash it out, but have some discussion over the next couple of weeks. So again, I'm going to go sort of quickly through this, because again, there's just so much here, and for sake of time, I don't really want to do a 45, 50 minute Facebook video. So we're gonna dive in here in just a second. Before we do, I want to let me pray for you, and then we'll get started. So let's pray together. God, we thank you for tonight. Thank you for the opportunity we have again to meet, even if it's online, to read your word, to study your word, to really wrestle with your word. God, that's something that we do from time to time. God, sometimes your word is convicting, sometimes it's hard to understand, and so we wrestle with it, we work through it, and hopefully, God, my prayer for our members and for other people who may be watching this is that we would get to know you better as we study your word, because that's ultimately the goal, is to know you better as we read it. And we just thank you again for this time tonight, and we ask that you would be we just pray that you would be glorified in it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So again, in chapter 15, Eliphaz is responding to Job. And what we're going to see tonight is our scripture tonight is going to really happen in kind of 2 parts. The first part is going to be Eliphaz kind of gives a sort of this preface that kind of indicates that his doctrine is true. He's almost going to give, not like his pedigree per se, but he's going to tell Eliphaz kind of where he's coming from, and why he thinks what he thinks, and why he believes that what he believes is what he's going to say is true. And so, and there's not, he's not influenced by worship of other gods or other cultures and that type of thing. And that's a fairly short part. And then in the second part of this, which is the bulk of the rest of chapter 15, what he's going to do is he's going to walk through sort of this journey he's going to talk about the wicked man. Really is who he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about this person that's living in sin. The implication is going to be that somewhere in here lies Job, because again, in Eliphaz's mind, and also with Zophar and Bildad, the other 2 friends, they really think that because of their very limited knowledge of God, they really believe that if somebody experienced what Job has gone through, then they've done something to make God mad. They've done something to cause this calamity or this kind of destruction. So the second part is going to be is sort of, he's going to tell Job kind of this process that kind of walks through the troubled conscience and the fate of the wicked man. He's going to talk about, again, sort of the troubled conscience, the consequences of the wicked man. That's going to be verses 20 through 24. The cause of this, which is his defiance of God and his self-centered life. And Eliphaz is going to be really clear about what it looks like to live in rebellion to God. And there's some implications that Eliphaz is going to make. And then the end of this, verses 29 through 35, is a picture of punishment and kind of the disastrous end of this person. What's at the end of the road for this person who lives in rebellion of God, who rebellion to God, who lives in open sin, who doesn't regard God as God. So with that very long introduction, we're going to jump in verses 17 through 19 of chapter 15 of Job say this, and this is Eliphaz speaking. He says, "I will tell you, hear me. What I have seen I will declare. What wise men have told, not hiding anything received from their fathers, to whom alone the land was given, and no alien passed among them." And so again, this is sort of Eliphaz's preface to transition into the second part of his response to Job. And really what he says, I'm gonna tell you something and listen to me. And he says, what I've seen, I will declare. I will make this very clear to you, and I'll make the statement that I really believe. One scholar that I'd read indicated that Eliphaz may have been quoting from a book, probably maybe some book that he had that kind of dealt with this. It could possibly have just been Eliphaz's view as he studied wicked men over the course of his life, and he's watched people who have not lived for God and have seen kind of how they've ended up. So, he may be speaking maybe from personal things that he's seen. He may be talking to Job, maybe telling him about things that he's read. And so he goes on and he says, what wise men have told, not hiding anything from their fathers. And so what he's going to do is he's going to tell Job things that he's learned from wise men, from people that he believes are wise and who were transparent and openly, openly experienced and told their stories. He says, what wise men have told, not hiding anything received from their fathers. So, so these are men that he trusts, or these are men that, that he believes are wise, and he thinks that their stories and what they've told him have been forthcoming. And verse 19 is really where we see this idea of him talking about his faith. He said, to whom alone the land was given, and no alien passed among them. And so basically, again, what he's saying here is he's going to tell Job things that he's learned from men who are wise, men who followed God, men who walked with God. He's going to tell Job things about men that he's seen who didn't follow God, who didn't live wisely. And he says, to whom alone the land was given, and no alien passed among them. This idea of this what I'm talking about is not influenced by other religions. I'm not telling you what other faiths are doing. I'm not, it's kind of what he's saying to Job. I'm not telling you what other faiths are doing. I'm not telling you what these people who worship this God are doing, or these people who worship that God are doing. I'm telling you what people who worship our God, the people who inherited our land, the people who worship like us, this is what they've seen and what they've experienced, and this is what I'm going to tell you now. And so again, he's gonna give this response from his perspective. The things that Eliphaz says in this chapter are not necessarily wrong in and of themselves, and we talk about this a lot. They're just in the context in which Job and he are talking to one another. He's wrong. His content, his approach is wrong, but the content that he's going to give Job is not necessarily wrong, and it just doesn't really apply to where he is. So what we're going to do is we're going to read verses 20 through 24, and then we'll kind of talk about those. And this is what Eliphaz says. He says, the wicked man rides with pain all his days, and the number of years is hidden from the oppressor. Dreadful sounds are in his ears. In prosperity the destroyer comes upon him. He does not believe that he will return from darkness, for a sword is waiting for him. He wanders about for bread, saying, where is it? He knows that a day of darkness is ready at hand. They overpower him like a king ready for battle. And so what he says is as he starts off this and he goes into to kind of telling Job about this wicked man, he said, the wicked man writhes with pain all his days, and the number of years is hidden from the oppressor. And I guess the best example that I could use for this really is looking at my job. A kind of a good parallel is looking at somebody who's violated the conditions of the probation, who's done something that's gotten them in trouble. Maybe they've been arrested and bonded out before I found out about it, or maybe they're using drugs and they don't think I know, or maybe they stopped reporting and I issued a warrant for them or something like that. And what happens is they a lot of times they'll find themselves just constantly looking over their shoulder. They can't ever get comfortable. They can't ever be at peace. They can't ever really relax. A lot of times they know that they're wanted, and so they just can't seem to calm down. They can't relax and be at peace because they know they kind of have the shadow hanging over them. And what Eliphaz says here is the wicked man writhes. The wicked man is tormented. The wicked man, another word for that, some translations may say the wicked man wanders. But the idea there is that he lives with this pain all of his days. He lives with this idea, that there's something wrong, and he can't quite seem to shake it. Now, we know that a lot of times the wicked, people don't necessarily they don't necessarily writhe in pain all of their days. What we see sometimes is there are people who are living completely in sin, completely in rebellion to God, who they don't care. It doesn't matter to them. So this isn't necessarily like in every situation, but many times, there is this idea of someone, especially if they're confronted with the truth of the gospel. Especially if they go to church and the pastor says something that maybe addresses something that they're struggling with, then suddenly that they'll have this conviction, this sort of I know this may be wrong, but and then we'll find people a lot of times that they'll justify it, and they and so it's sort of this idea again of just sort of the wicked man kind of carries this pain, this idea with him all of his days. And he says, and the number of years is hidden from the oppressor. Now, this phrase is disputed, but kind of the most realistic interpretation that I could find was that he's kind of grouping when he says the wicked man, and then he also says the oppressor, and kind of likening those two. And so he says, the wicked man, and then he says the oppressor, and kind of almost like he's talking about kind of the same person. But basically, the most realistic interpretation that I got was that the oppressor has no idea how long he'll live. Again, in this culture, in this context, I'm going to adjust a little bit. In this context, the idea was that if they were blessed, then God was happy with them. If they were, if they were doing, if they were pleasing God, then God was blessing them. And if they weren't pleasing God, then they were being punished. And so it was a very binary view of life. And so, if you were good and God was pleased with you, then the idea was you'd live a long life, and you could expect to grow to be an old man because God was pleased with you. You've lived a life of faith, and so you're blessed with years. But if you're in sin, if you're an oppressor is here, then you don't know how long you're going to live. The number of years is hidden from you. You have no clue. You may live, you may not live past tomorrow. If you're according to Eliphaz, this wicked man, this person who's living in sin. And so he goes on and he says, dreadful sound, this is verse 21, dreadful sounds are in his ears, and in prosperity the destroyer comes upon him. And so the wicked man not only wanders, not only can't settle, not only is he sort of constantly living with this idea that he's wicked, but it says that dreadful sounds are in his ears. That phrase, dreadful sounds, literally means the sounds of terrors. Again, this is according to Eliphaz. This wicked man is always tormented by his evil works. I guess probably what we might say here is this might describe someone who's living in rebellion to God, who's living in sin, but may be experiencing sort of the conviction of the Holy Spirit, may be confronted with the reality of the fact that they know that they're doing things that aren't right. And so there's this, there's this sort of internal struggle, this constant kind of constant kind of thought in the back of your mind that, what if I'm wrong? What if this is wrong? There's sort of this internal sort of struggle. And then he says, in prosperity, the destroyer comes upon him. And what he's saying there is that even in prosperity, even when the wicked man gathers wealth, when he's prosperous, the destroyer is there to overtake him. Even if he's successful, he can't really be at peace because even if he's gathering wealth, if he's doing well in life, there's always this thought that he could lose it. There's always this idea that something is kind of waiting for him to take it away from him. And so he says, dreadful sounds are in his ears. In prosperity, the destroyer comes upon him. And then in verse 22, he says he does not believe that he will return from darkness, for a sword is waiting for him. And what Eliphaz is talking about here is he's talking, he kind of describes this sort of internal conflict, this internal struggle. There are these, he constantly is living sort of with the sounds of terrors in his ears. There's constantly these things reminding him of his wickedness. In his prosperity, the destroyer comes upon him. Even as he does well, he can't really do well. He can't really get ahead. And then he, in verse 22, he says he does not return, that he will return from darkness. There's what Eliphaz is talking about here is there's almost this hopelessness that Eliphaz is describing that this wicked person experiences. There's that they're gone. There's no hope for them. It says they're done, and a sword for a sword is waiting for him. And this can be connected to Genesis 4:14, where Cain said that it shall come to pass that everyone that finds me shall slay me. As Cain was dealing with the fact that he had killed his brother and God had cursed him. And so, and this is Cain kind of starting to really understand this sort of this hopeless situation that he's in. And it said when Eliphaz says he does not believe that he will return from darkness, that word darkness it means more of like a misery or adversity. He's in this place. He's in this place mentally, emotionally, maybe spiritually, and he doesn't feel like there's any way to get out of this. He just kind of feels hopeless. And he doesn't believe that he'll return from it. He's kind of stuck here, and then there's that sort of the thing that he has to look forward to is death. Is really death. Is punishment for this. And so he goes on, and again, he's discussing again this wicked person and kind of what he's kind of the mindset. And he says he wanders about for bread, saying, "Where is it?" He knows that a day of darkness is ready at his hand. And so when it says he wanders about, again, he's talking about sort of this transient, this unsettled sort of mentality, this sort of lifestyle, not knowing where his next meal is going to come from, not knowing, not really having any confidence in anything, not really having faith that God's going to provide for him. It's, if I don't go out and find it, I'm going to starve. There's no concept of trusting God for his provision. It's just, where's the bread? How am I going to live my next meal? And really what Eliphaz is doing here is Eliphaz is really painting a clear picture of really what it looks like to live apart from the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. And especially not just living apart from the hope of Jesus Christ, but having something to compare that to, having something, knowing that there's something else out there. This isn't somebody who has no clue. This isn't somebody who has never considered anything otherwise, and they're just kind of happy where they are. This is somebody who understands their lot, who understands to some degree that there's sin in their life, that they're not living. That they're living in conflict and in want. And so what Eliphaz does is Eliphaz, and we'll talk about this at the end, really talks in clear pictures about really what it's like to live with no hope, but almost like, almost knowing that you don't have hope, I guess is probably the best way to say that. And he says, he wanders about for bread, saying, where is it? He knows that a day of darkness is ready at his hand. And again, that word darkness comes back again, that sort of that word misery or adversity. Just knowing that that it's, that there's more things that are just waiting for him. He said, knowing that no matter how far ahead he gets, there's just no hope beyond that. There's no hope beyond anything that what he can hold in his hand and what he can get right then, because it could all go away. He, in his mind, he may not even live till tomorrow. So there's just this real hopelessness there. And he says, verse 24, he says, trouble and anguish make him afraid. They overpower him like a king ready for battle. And so trouble and anguish, that word anguish also can mean distress. And it's, this trouble, this anguish, this sort of despair makes him afraid. And not only that, but it says it overpowers him like a king ready for battle. And that phrase, king ready for battle, literally means like a leader of an army. Understanding that, that again, there's this not only just this discomfort, but there's this deep-rooted unsettlement that this I hope that's a word, unsettlement, that Eliphaz is using to Eliphaz is describing this wicked person. And I thought about yesterday. I went out and did a home visit. There was a guy that we had been looking for months, and I'd kind of hear somebody that had seen him, and we just couldn't find him. We'd looked for him for a long time, and I'd gotten a warrant on him because he basically disappeared on us. He moved. He changed his phone number, quit his job. He was avoiding us, and so I had a warrant on him. And so I drove by his house yesterday, and his car was there. So me and the guy that works for me, we went out to his house and made contact with him. We searched the house. We found some meth and found some pipes and some other stuff. And of course, he denied everything. I don't know where that is. I don't know whose that is. That is not mine. And so he's clamming up on us. And then he finally, after a few minutes, he finally started talking, and he says, I have been using some lately, and and then he said, I want to get clean, I want to get myself straightened out, I just don't know where to start. And one of the things that hit me about him was, and I told him this, I said, honestly, dude, until you reach the point to where you're willing to do the hard thing, until you knew you had a warrant, you knew we were looking for you for months. And he goes, yes, sir, I know. And I said, so first of all, you're avoiding us. You're looking over your shoulder. You're always kind of concerned about us being, just showing up at your house like we did today. I said, as long as you've got that hanging over your head, you're not going to go through the trouble to really get clean, because there's no point. Because even if you get clean, you still know you're going to go to jail when we find you. And he goes, yeah, you know what, you're right. And I said, so I kind of get it to some degree. Like, there's not really an incentive for you to get clean, to really turn away from this stuff, because at the end of the day, until you get all this stuff taken care of, you're always going to be looking over your shoulder, whether you're clean or dirty. And so in your mind, you might as well keep using drugs. And he says, yeah, you're right. That's true. And so, we kind of, trying to help him out. We'll see how it goes. But he was really living like Eliphaz is describing here, this always looking over his shoulder, always worried about the next thing, always worried that we were going to be there to get him, always, worried that, that everything was going to fall out from under him. And so, and Eliphaz, when he talks about this, again, he's talking about this person who, just this wicked man, and how, he's always worried about his fate. He's always worried about the next thing he's going to eat. He can't ever get comfortable. He can't ever get, really get any, he can't get his feet under him, because he's always kind of worried about the next thing. And so a lot of times, unless something happens to bring them back, unless something happens to get their attention to really shake them, a lot of times a person living like this doesn't drift to God on their own. A lot of times there has to be something to jolt them. With my guy yesterday, there's got to be something that's gonna get his attention, to get him to realize, I can't live like this anymore, and I need to do something to fix it. What Eliphaz is going to do over the next several verses is he's going to talk about sort of the result of this. What kind of he talks about how the wicked lives in this mentality, And then he's going to talk about sort of where this leads to. And so verses 25 and 26, Eliphaz says this. He says, "For he stretches out his hand against God and acts defiantly against the Almighty, running stubbornly against him with a strong embossed shield." And what happens eventually is this person that Eliphaz is describing, eventually what happens is they eventually just start living in rebellion. They eventually just start, just kind of thumbing their nose at God. And that's kind of maybe a little bit more modern way of saying that. But he says, "For he stretches out his hand against God. He acts defiantly against the Almighty." There becomes this animosity towards good, this animosity towards God. Again, the wicked person, without this event that causes them to become humbled, without being confronted with the gospel in their life, what happens is a lot of times this person will really develop this sort of animosity towards God and will kind of, again, stretch out his hand against him. And it says, "running stubbornly against him with his strong embossed shield." And that phrase, "running stubbornly against him," there's an indication there that this isn't somebody that's just kind of floating along, that's just kind of passively not living for God. This is somebody who's actively rebelling against God, who's actively, and when it says running stubbornly against him, it literally says runs with his neck, and kind of the word picture there is that of a bull who's charging, and they drop their head and they kind of raise their neck up and then really run towards what it is that they're going after. And so there's this there's this open rebellion, this running with your neck against God, dropping your head, dropping his head and running right at God. And it says with his strong embossed shield. And that phrase, that strong embossed shield, that in your translation may say something about with a bossed shield or something like that. And kind of the picture there is a group of soldiers who would hold their shields together so that they overlapped and basically form what looked like a shell. So the front line of soldiers would hold their shields up, and then the other soldiers would come over them and put their shields like over them, and then other shields would be on like that, and so it would almost look like a turtle. The Romans did this, and it was called a phalanx, and it was similar, except that was more of an offensive strategy. But this is but anyway, but that's kind of what the word picture there for the shield is this. Somebody who's standing against God, who's running against him, and who really has sort of built up this defense against God, and they're gonna live their life, they're gonna do their thing, and they don't care what God says, and they don't care, in their mind they don't care what God does, and so. So again, this is Eliphaz, and he's kind of going through this process, and then he goes on and he says, verses 27 and 28. "Though he has covered his face with his fatness and made his waist heavy with fat, he dwells in desolate cities and houses which no one inhabits, which are destined to become ruins." And so he says, he goes on and talking about this, living in rebellion to God. And he says, though he's covered his face with his fatness, though he's, it's like when I read that, I almost think of like somebody who's like eating like like chicken or ribs or something, and you really get into it, and you've got the stuff all over your face, right? He's covered his face with his fatness and made his waist heavy with fat. Though he's eating well, he's sort of eating his fill, and he's living his life on his terms, and he thinks he's doing great. He says he dwells in desolate cities, in houses which no one inhabits, which are destined to become ruins. And what Eliphaz is saying here is this person, even if he's eating good, even if he seems to be, really experiencing, good things, it's all empty. It's all vain. It's all just shallow. There's nothing to it. He's kind of living sort of alone in an empty house with all of this stuff. Kind of makes me think of Lego Batman. And Batman goes home and he parks the Batmobile in the Batcave, and then he goes up and he's gonna eat his lobster. I forget what he called it, but like his lobster, whatever. And so he's just in this big empty house, and of course Batman's like, we're alone, and I'm better by myself, and there's this. he's in this big mansion completely by himself, completely alone, and he's eating this great stuff, and he's got all of this stuff, but he's just empty. Like there's no substance, there's no one there to enjoy it with, there's no family, there's nothing. And so that's what Eliphaz is talking about when he talks about this. He says, though he's covered his face with his fatness and made his waist heavy with fat, he dwells in desolate cities and houses which no one inhabits, which are destined to become ruined. So what he has is going to fall apart. It's this empty, vain, hollow existence. And verses 29 through 35, and we'll be done hopefully in just a couple of minutes, because we're already at 30 minutes. What Eliphaz is going to do is Eliphaz is going to talk about the end result. He's going to talk about what happens to this person at the end of it. And I want to read these 7 verses, and then we'll kind of go through them, and we'll be done. But he says he will not be rich, nor will his health continue, nor will his possessions overspread the earth. He will not depart from darkness. The flame will dry out his branches, and by the breath of his mouth, God's mouth, he will go away. Let him not trust in futile things, deceiving himself, for futility will be his reward. It will be accomplished before his time, and his branch will not be green. He will shake off his unripe grape like a vine, and cast off his blossom like an olive tree. For the company of hypocrites will be barren, and fire will consume the tents of bribery. They conceive trouble and bring forth futility. Their womb prepares deceit. And so Eliphaz, what he says here is that at the end of this thing, at the end of this person's life, they're not going to be wealthy. They're not going to be rich. Their wealth is not going to continue. The fat that they're enjoying for a moment is going to last for a moment, and then it's going to be gone. He won't have any, he won't have any wealth. He won't have any influence. It says, nor will his possessions overspread the earth. And there's kind of the picture there that not only will he die, not only will his wealth end, not only will his, will he not be rich, but really at the end of this, not only all of that, but also like he'll lose his legacy. He'll lose everything. And if you think about it, it's almost like what he's saying here is Job is experiencing this. Because if you weren't with us at the beginning of the study, Job lost everything. He lost his kids. He lost his camels, his sheep, his servants. He lost everything except the land that he was on. I mean, he lost everything. Everything. Again, except the ground he was on and his wife, and everything else was gone. And so kind of the implication here that Eliphaz is sort of making here is that he's kind of implying that Job is this guy. And he says he will not be rich, nor will his wealth continue, nor will his possessions overspread the earth. Again, this, he's going to lose everything. He won't have a legacy. He won't have anything. It says he will not depart from darkness. It says the flame will dry out his branches, and by the breath of his mouth he will go away. And again, it's talking about, when it says the flame will dry out his branches, talking about really the punishment of God. As God finally punishes this person, it will dry out his branches. And it says, by the breath of his mouth he will go away. And really what he's saying here is he's indicating that God will have very little trouble. As rebellious as this person is, and as strong-willed as they are, and as much as they're fighting God over and over and over, at the end of this, really God's, he's saying that just by God breathing on him will basically wipe him out. And he says, let him not trust in futile things, deceiving himself, for futility will be his reward. And what he's saying there is really what we trust in is kind of what we'll get. If we trust in futile things, we're going to receive futile things. Our faith is going to be futile. If we trust in things that are temporary, fickle, or insignificant, then the rewards that we get from that, at the end of that's what we'll get. Jesus said something like this when he said, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal." And Jesus said this, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And there's this idea there that this person who's futile, is trusting in futile things, and because of that, futility will be their reward. And I really need to end this thing. It says it will be accomplished before his time, and his branch will not be green. So, but before he knows what happened, again, this end to him will happen before he's ready for it. And it says his branch will not be green. But he this person may think he's got longer to live or whatever, but God will do this before or maybe when this wicked person is not expecting it. It says he will shake off his unripe grape like a vine and cast off his blossom like an olive tree. And that phrase there, when it says to shake off his unripe grape like a vine, sort of what he's talking about is the way that like inclement weather or adverse circumstances would cause a vine to lose grapes before they got ripe. Again, he's talking about sort of this futile life and this empty life that this person has. And it says, cast off his blossom like an olive tree. Now, that what I read was that olive trees will have blossoms, but the thing about their blossoms is they're very, very they're not durable at all. They're fragile. And so when the olive trees would blossom and a wind would come through, it would blow the blossoms off the olive trees. They don't, again, they're very fragile. They're there 1 minute and they're gone the next. And then verses 34 and 35 say this. He says, for the company of hypocrites will be barren, and fire will consume the tents of bribery. They conceive trouble and bring forth futility. Their womb prepares deceit. And so, and not only will this person lose everything, not only will they, will everything be taken from them. Not only do they, are they not nearly as strong as they think they are, but also the company of hypocrites will be barren. They won't, at the end of it, they won't have any friends. They won't have any company. They won't have anybody with them. And it says, fire will consume the tents of bribery. Now, this is very well possibly, again, Eliphaz is sort of taking a dig at Job. And so what we're going to see in chapter 29 is that Job was a sheik or an emir and probably like a magistrate. And so the insinuation here is when he says, and fire will consume the tents of bribery, it's sort of the implication here is he's maybe accusing Job of possibly accepting bribes, possibly doing things that are, that may be immoral or illegal. And so, in chapter 1, one of Job's servants runs to him and says that your sheep and your servants were burned up in a fire of God from heaven. And so this is Eliphaz maybe talking about that, and again, kind of making another accusation. And then the wicked, they conceive trouble and bring forth futility. Their womb prepares deceit. This wickedness just continues on from generation to generation. They, even in their womb, they're preparing deceit. And so, there's no end to it, but for some external work of God in their life. That's chapter 15. Again, I blew through it, but we're at 37 minutes now. So what I'll do tonight is and I want you to comment and maybe let's have some interaction. What is God saying to you in this? Now we know what the text is saying to the original readers. Eliphaz thinks that Job has been involved in sin that's causes suffering. I think what the text is saying to us is again we see sort of this process of somebody living in rebellion to God. Living a life just kind of thumbing their nose at God, and we see this journey, this process, where they start, kind of how it turns into sort of this rebellion, and how it ends with their death. And Eliphaz is completely wrong to attach this to Job because he obviously it doesn't know. But apart from that, we see sort of the mentality of living without this hope, and we see that there are consequences. And living lives in rebellion to God. And so I'd love to know kind of what you think. There are a couple of things that I thought of, but I'd like to know how can we apply to this where we are now? Like, how can you apply this to your life? Where, what is it, as we've talked about this, what are maybe some things that God's brought to your mind? Comment those. I'd love to read them and hear what you're thinking and what this means to you. I'm done. I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to end this thing. God, again, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for this Bible study and for the opportunity we have to study your word. And I pray that God, we would live lives of humility, Father, that we would live lives submitted to you. God, even those of us that are saved and we know we're saved, Father, there's always that temptation to do our own thing, to live our life and think that we know best, and help us to God, help us to have faith that's strong. Help us to place our faith in eternal things and not futile things. And I pray for our church that you would continue to keep us, our people well, that you would continue to give us opportunities to reflect you in our lives and our workplaces. And God, I just pray that you would keep everybody until we're able to meet again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Y'all have a great week.